Hello, we are Alice, Riley, and Summer, and we will be presenting today on the Montana 4-H Foundation. To give a little roadmap throughout our presentation, we will first be discussing who 4-H is and how they use their funding. Next, we will explain what exactly fraud is and how specific types of fraud can occur in 4-H. Lastly, we will be giving some recommendations for how 4-H can avoid potential fraud through prevention and detection methods.
What is the Montana 4-H Foundation? The Montana 4-H Foundation is a nonprofit corporation dedicated to supporting statewide 4-H programs. The foundation raises private funds, manages finances, and partners with MSU extensions to provide opportunities for youth in Montana. They provide educational opportunities to youth, staff, and volunteers all over the state. Kids are able to participate in different activities, including STEM and agriculture, healthy living, and civic engagements. The 4-H Foundation is made up of a board of directors, an executive director, and a business manager. The board of directors are spread out throughout the state, while the executive director and the business manager are in the office here on MSU's campus in Taylor Hall. According to their website, the 4-H Foundation engages with nearly 20,000 youth across Montana on a yearly basis. They train 4,000 volunteers annually to provide leadership and work with youth as partners in learning. They educate more than 6,000 youth a year in outdoor education projects. They offer over 200 hands-on learning experiences and research-based curriculums. They improve youth communication skills that can be applied in all aspects of their future, and they provide 4-H youth with employable skills. As a nonprofit, the foundation relies heavily on private donations that they receive by cash, check, and credit cards through the mail or over the phone. Their main purpose is to support statewide 4-H, so they also receive many reimbursement and disbursement requests throughout the year. These are two areas within the foundation that are potentially vulnerable to fraud.
Now that we have learned about who 4-H is and what they do, I will be explaining the textbook definitions of what types of fraud 4-H is susceptible to. 4-H is a well-known and well-loved organization. A lot of past and current members love to donate in any way they can. Since 4-H receives a lot of its funding through cash, check, and credit card donations, they are at a high risk for skimming. Skimming is the taking of resources before they are entered into the accounting system. Specifically, cash skimming is the taking of physical cash or checks before they are entered. Skimming can be undertaken by any employee who receives the cash or checks. These people are the ones who are in the position to skim. They can easily slip the cash or check into their pocket with little evidence to be detected. The most difficult part about skimming is that there is no audit trail to follow. This makes it very difficult to detect as there is no cash in the system to be missing. Credit card skimming is very similar to cash skimming. However, rather than the physical cash or check being stolen, the card information is taken. This can occur at an ATM or over the phone purchases and donations. Employees taking the phone orders can write down the information to use at a later date. Another type of fraud that 4-H is susceptible to is expense reimbursement schemes. The main way 4-H disperses its funding is through 7 different locations submitting expense requests. There are 4 main categories to expense reimbursement schemes. The first is fictitious reimbursements. These occur when an employee or organization will make up a fake purchase that never occurred and submit it for reimbursement. This can be done through creating counterfeit supporting documentation or obtaining blank receipts from vendors that they are able to fill out. This type of fraud can also occur when the employee or organization submits expense reports that were paid by someone else. The second type is mischaracterized reimbursements. These occur when an employee or organization submits for reimbursement as a legitimate business expense, but in reality, the expense was for personal gain. The next type of reimbursement scheme is multiple reimbursements. These occur when the same expense is submitted several times for reimbursement. Employees and organizations are able to do this through submitting different receipts for the same expense, or they can purchase the items with a company card while also submitting that expense and claiming they personally paid for it. The last type is overstated reimbursements. This type of reimbursement schemes occur when the employee or organization overstates the actual cost of the expenditure. Employees or organizations can alter receipts to show a higher total. This can occur through photoshopping receipts, changing ones to sevens, adding zeros, writing out numbers and writing over it, and much more. Keep in mind that both external and internal parties are able to alter receipts. Another technique to the scheme is through the employer overpurchasing, submitting for full reimbursement, and then returning some items purchased.
How can fraud occur in the Montana 4-H Foundation? The first is through cash donations. The foundation receives the majority of their donations by mail. Cash and checks are the primary forms of donations that are mailed into the 4-H office. The business manager is in charge of opening the mail, recording the donations on a log, and then taking those deposits to the bank. This leaves the opportunity for cash skimming since there is no separation of duties, and the cash checks could easily be removed before the deposit makes it onto the log and into the bank. Another way is through credit card donations. Donors also mail in their credit card information on a piece of paper or call it in over the phone. The business manager is in charge of entering the donation into the credit card processing system. This opens the possibility for misuse of the credit card information provided by the donor. If it is sent in by mail, the number could be used for other purposes other than just the intended donation, or if it's submitted over the phone, it could be written down and misused that way. The third way that fraud could occur in the foundation is through their expense reimbursement and disbursements. The foundation supports statewide 4-H youth with private donations and managed financial resources. Expense reimbursements and disbursements are requested daily from counties, private vendors, and local communities to fund 4-H programs. The requests are submitted to the foundation, approved by 2 board members, and then a check is sent out for the amount requested. The requests are reviewed online by the board. Due to the amount of support offered by the Montana 4-H Foundation, requests come in constantly, which leaves the opportunity for fictitious, mischaracterized, or overstated expense requests to be approved. One example of an expense reimbursement request would be if an MSU Extension employee travels for a horse show and then submits a request for mileage. They fill out a form that states the miles they drove, mail it into the office, and the board approves it and then mails that employee an check. Some things to think about with this. The employee filled out the reimbursement request with the mileage, but was there any follow-up to confirm that the event was real and that this employee did in fact travel? Then we have an example of a disbursement. This is to a photographer who worked that same horse show. The 4-H extension that put on the horse show submits a request to the foundation to send a check to the photographer that they wanted to be there. Since the agreement was between the extension and the vendor, how does the 4-H Foundation know that the request is valid and that the amount is correct? These are a couple of things to think about with the amount of requests for reimbursements and disbursements come in.
So now I would like to move on to the next topic, which is how can 4-H avoid potential fraudulent activities and what methods can be used to prevent or detect fraud. Before I jump right into it, I would like to briefly explain why this matters to 4-H to begin with. Nonprofit organizations, including 4-H, can be more susceptible to fraud traditionally, due to having fewer resources available to help prevent and recover from a fraud loss. This sector is particularly at risk because of less oversight and lack of certain internal controls. According to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners ACFE 2020 report, there was 191 nonprofit cases and the average loss was $639,000. This is significant because money that was to be used for the missions of the nonprofits instead was lost to fraudsters. These are the methods we recommend your organization to implement to prevent and detect fraud. There is a general strategy to mitigate risk by setting up the fraud policies. Additionally, it is very important that methods should be implemented to mitigate specific areas which have higher chances of fraud. As we have already covered, the specific areas we chose this time are cash and credit card donation, as well as expense reimbursement for volunteers. So I would just like to go through each method and talk about why and how each method can be valuable. Exploring this will allow your organization to consider implementing these methods. As a general prevention method, we recommend you to have a formal fraud policy. Formal ethics policies like fraud policy help anyone who's involved in organization understand that any type of fraudulent activities are not acceptable. According to certified fraud examiners who participated in the ACFE's fraud surveys, organizations that implemented anti-fraud policy noted median losses that was 42.9% lower than those of organizations lacking these controls. This is an example of a fraud policy. The first page of the policy highlights the zero tolerance against fraud that we previously covered. This gives the employees and also volunteers the knowledge they need about this topic. An ethics training session could be also held to cover this policy, and the employees could read it and sign that the material has been received. Cash and credit card donation is susceptible to skimming. The method to prevent this type of fraud is to implement a system of segregation of duties. Segregation of duty is one of the most important internal control activities. This method is to use 3 employees. One is for receiving cash and checks, the other recording the payment, and the final employee's task is to deposit the payments. This ensures that not only one person is controlling the entire process. To prevent skimming of credit card payments, proper handling of the donor's card information is necessary. We recommend to implement a policy mandating that employees enter donors' payment information directly into the system. Employees will not be permitted to write down credit card information on paper. Also, the creation of an employee training course which details the proper handling of donors' data, including taking donations over the telephone and techniques to minimize potential fraudulent activities. We have created an expense reimbursement form that volunteers should complete. This form requires volunteers to attach original receipts when they submit volunteer reimbursement form. This makes it more difficult for them to commit any type of expense reimbursement fraud. As many examples illustrate, adequate reporting programs are vital to serious efforts to detect fraud. Simply setting up a hotline can be very effective and can be also used as an early prevention method.